Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the Politics and Media Show with me, Salma Yaqub. On today's show, we'll be discussing two important issues. In part two, we'll be debating what role Muslim women should have in society. But in the first half of the show, we'll be reflecting on the not guilty verdict delivered by Southwark Crown Court on Friday to 4 police officers who'd been charged with violently assaulting a British Muslim man on an early morning raid on his home. Babar Ahmad said he'd been repeatedly punched in the head and already won £60,000 in damages from the Metropolitan Police in 2009, who conceded that Ahmad had been the victim of a serious and prolonged attack. And so the acquittals raised new questions about Babar Ahmad's case, with many sure to be wondering how the police can pay damages, yet a trial can find the police not guilty of assault. Now, before we begin, I'd like to point out that we did ask the police to come on the programme, but they refused. However, they have released a statement, which I'd like to read out, on the part of Acting Commander Carl Bussey, Head of the Metropolitan's Directorate of Professional Standards. This is what he said. The issues that have arisen out of the arrest have now been ongoing for a long time, and undoubtedly this will have been a difficult 7 years for all involved. Given the result, I will now ensure a misconduct review is conducted immediately, so that the officers can be given a decision as soon as possible and this matter finally brought to a conclusion. Well, with me in the studio to discuss this is Babar Ahmad's father, Ashfaq Ahmad. Welcome to the programme. We're also joined today by former Deputy Assistant Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Brian Paddick. Thank you very much. Welcome to the programme. Sorry for that there. Coming to yourself first, what's your reaction to this verdict?
I should say that we are not disappointed. Mm-hmm. The main thing which has come out of this whole thing is that Babar waited for about 8 years for these 4 people to come face to face with him, and he wanted to tell his story himself. And that is the chance he got, and regardless of the verdict.
Actual verdict.
Yeah, and he wanted to tell the people, the public, the media, everyone, what actually happened to him. And I have absolutely no doubt in my mind that every word that Babar said is absolutely true. And of course, they have tried to find that you have been telling lies and all that, but I don't believe that. Mm-hmm. We have brought our children like that they should tell the truth and all that. And on the other hand, the one thing which has disappointed me in this is that we look at the police as the custodians of law. We tell our children to go to them if there's any problem, if they need any help, they should go to them. And if this is the sort of thing which they get from them, then it makes you feel uncomfortable. It says that I come to you for help and you treat me like that. So where do we go from there?
So it seems that you've been relieved that your son had a day in court.
That's
after
correct,
8 years.
Yes.
But surely you would have had some disappointment at the actual verdict.
Yes, one thing is that the trial went for about 4 or 5 weeks, and the verdict was given within 1 hour. The jury went out and then they gave the result within an hour. So we would have expected, they should have taken a bit longer.
I would like to come back to some of the details of the case. We have with us Brian Paddick, former senior police officer with the Metropolitan Police. Were you surprised at the verdict, especially given that the Metropolitan Police has actually paid out £60,000 already in this case, but this information was not allowed to be brought into the court? Could you explain how that works?
Well, my understanding is that initially the police offered to pay an amount of money to Babar without admission of liability. He resisted that. The police then did admit liability and paid compensation. But in those sorts of civil cases, the burden of proof is on the balance of probabilities. Was this more or less likely to have happened? And on that basis, they decided that there was an assault on Babar, and that's why they paid the money out. In a criminal trial, the burden of proof is much higher. Mm-hmm. The case has to be proved beyond all reasonable doubt. So if there is any doubt at all in the jury's mind about whether or not the police were guilty, then the jury had to acquit. And clearly there were some doubts in the jury's mind, and that is why, presumably, they acquitted the 4 police officers.
And now we're hearing, and we can make public the information that 2 of the officers involved, 2 out of the 4, had actually had up to 40 allegations of abuse by other individuals before this case, and yet again that information was not brought before the jury. Do you think that would have influenced them differently had they known that?
I think it would have had a significant impact on the jury. One, if they knew that the police lawyers had already paid out and admitted liability, and also if the police officer's previous record of complaints had been made public. Now, we don't know. Presumably, many of those, if not all of those allegations against those police officers were found to be unsubstantiated. So they weren't convicted of those complaints. But, you know, people will say there is no smoke without fire.
So if you can just explain for our viewers, why is it this kind of vital information, which you think would have a direct bearing on a case like this, that information was not made available? You know, is this just how the law works? Was this something that was actually just for this case only? What's the explanation?
In British law, there are very, very few cases where the previous character of the person who is accused can be made known to the jury. Each case is treated as a separate incident, and the jury should make up their minds on the basis of the facts of that particular case and not on the basis of the person's previous record. And that applies in most cases of criminal law in the UK, and it applied in this case as well.
You're saying that you felt heartened that at least your son had his day in court, because obviously this was really not the main case that your son is facing at the moment. He's facing charges of terrorism. So can you explain why it is that he actually has not had his day in court when it comes to that original case, and he still is in detention without actually knowing when he may actually have a trial?
As I said, I mean, this is a bit unfortunate that he had to wait all that long to come to the court and give his evidence. And main thing is that he wanted that extradition case to be brought forward. He should be tried in this country. He was born and brought up here. And if there are any allegations... So
you can just explain what are the allegations against him, who's making them, and what the situation has been?
Well, there are certain allegations, and I think the lawyers will be in a better position to give you the details. I may be misquoting, or I may... But there have
been terrorism-related allegations.
What you call
and the Americans want to extradite
him. And they said they was raising funds, he was helping this and that and terrorism. But what we say that if whatever they have against him, he should be brought up in this British court here. Because like these police officers, they had a fair trial, and the judge said in the beginning of this case that no mention should be made of that £60,000 thing and, you know, whatever happened in 2009. So as you just said, that so that they should have a fair trial, the jury should not know anything about the past of the person. So in that respect, like the way they were treated, we want that Babar should be treated like that.
And at the moment, is there any end in sight? Have you got any indication that, you know, whether they're going to actually extradite him or whether he will have his chance to come before a court?
Yeah, we are still waiting to hear from European Court, ECU, and we are waiting to hear from them what will they decide whether he should be tried here or not. And here, I think it will be appropriate to mention what the judge said at the end of this policeman's trial. And if I can read it out to you, please.
Of course. So the judge, although it was a separate case, he made reference to the original case.
And this is very important, very significant thing that the judge came out of it, and he just mentioned it. Geoffrey Rivlin, judge, he said, I express the hope that the ordeal of a man in detention in this country for a number of years without trial is brought to an end as soon as possible. It is a matter of concern, and I would have thought should be a matter of concern for the public at large, quite apart from Mr. Ahmad, that here is a man